On August 17th, 2024, two major changes happened in the real estate industry due to the settlement of a class action lawsuit involving NAR, the National Association of Realtors. As part of the settlement, NAR agreed to the following. Number one, eliminate and prohibit MLS participants, subscribers, and sellers from making any offers of compensation in the MLS to buyer brokers or other buyer representatives. Number two, require MLS participants working with a buyer to enter into a written agreement with the buyer prior to touring a property. What does this mean for you as a buyer? That is our topic of discussion for today. Welcome to Denver Boulder Living. My name is Renee Sobering, broker with Team Sobering and Keller Williams Avenues Realty. And today we're going to be discussing the impact that these policy changes will have on you as a buyer in the Denver Boulder area. Let's talk about number one. Eliminating and prohibiting MLS participants from making offers of compensation in the MLS to buyer brokers or other representatives. What's changed here? Previously, the amount or percentage of the buyer broker's compensation was required to be stated in the MLS and was only visible to other MLS participants, in other words, other brokers. Compensation percentage was determined through negotiations between the seller and the listing broker before the listing went on the market. The seller agreed to pay the listing broker a specific percentage to list their home, and the listing broker would agree to allocate a piece of that compensation to pay the buyer's broker. It is important to note here that this amount has always been negotiable between the seller and the listing broker. As of August 17th, 2024, listing brokers are not only not required to input commission information for the buyer's broker, they are actually no longer allowed to post it anywhere in the MLS. Now, as a buyer, why should you care about this? Well, with no knowledge of what type of compensation will be offered, if any, for the work that they are doing, buyer brokers will have no choice but to ask their buyers to sign a document stating that they are willing to pay the buyer broker's commission if the seller is not offering one. It's either that or risk working for free. Which one would you choose? Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, so as a buyer, I not only have to come up with my down payment and closing costs, now I have to pay my broker's fee too? Maybe, maybe not. Signing an agreement with your broker stating that you will pay his or her commission does not necessarily mean that you will be the one footing the bill. By signing the agreement stating that you will pay your broker's designated amount, it allows your broker's compensation to become a negotiable item in the contract that you use when you purchase a home, meaning you can negotiate with the seller to get them to pay your broker so you don't have to. All right, time for some Q&A. If I can't afford to pay a broker, should I just go unrepresented? Of course, I am a broker, so I may be slightly biased here, but buyer brokers were not created simply to unlock doors. They were created to help buyers navigate the process of buying a home, which is a fairly complex process, from inspections to title work to appraisals to closing and all of the deadlines and details in between. It is their job to keep track of the deadlines, represent your best interests, counsel you in negotiation strategies, and educate you about the purchase process so that you know exactly what you're getting into when you purchase a home. Yes, the listing broker can fill out the forms for you if you decide to purchase a home without broker representation. But please keep this in mind. They represent the seller. I don't care how nice they seem. They have signed a contract to put the seller's best interests as their top priority, not yours. It is not in the seller's best interest for them to educate you about the buying process. It is not in the seller's best interest to make sure you don't miss an important deadline. You need to make the best decision for you, but I would never recommend going into a home purchase transaction without a licensed agent or broker representing you. My husband and I are both licensed brokers in Colorado, but when purchasing or selling property in other states, we always use an agent or broker who is licensed in that state, and we will continue to do so. What if the seller won't agree to pay and I can't afford to pay my broker? You should definitely discuss this possibility with your broker ahead of time. This is going to be the case with a lot of first-time home buyers, FHA buyers, and VA buyers. And unfortunately, these are the buyers who have the biggest need for a broker's guidance. One possibility is to have your broker call ahead to the listing agent before showings to see if the seller is offering compensation for your broker. While this is a good idea in theory, keep in mind two things. Number one, it may not be possible to get this information prior to your scheduled showings. And number two, just because a seller isn't offering compensation for a buyer broker, that doesn't mean that they won't if you make it a condition of your offer. If you do run up against a seller who is unwilling to pay your broker and you are unable to pay him or her, you may need to look at pursuing other properties. After all, your broker deserves to be paid for his or her work, do they not? We've talked a lot about compensation. Let's discuss policy change number 2. MLS participants working with a buyer are required to enter into a written agreement with the buyer prior to touring a property. What's changed? This was always really the way things were supposed to be done. Best practices were for the buyer broker to have a signed agreement with the buyer before touring properties. But over the years, many buyer brokers developed the habit of meeting clients for the first time at showings without entering into any type of agreement whatsoever. Also, to make things even more confusing, technically, this NAR policy change conflicts with Colorado law, which states that you are not required to enter into any type of agreement before touring properties. So any broker trying to tell you that this is now law is incorrect. However, while you may not be legally required to enter into any type of agreement before touring a property in Colorado, there is absolutely nothing stopping your potential buyer broker from having a personal policy in place to always have a signed agreement in place with the buyer before touring properties. And I do believe this will become standard practice as we move forward. Just put yourself in the buyer broker's shoes for one moment. Would you work for weeks at a job where they refuse to give you any guarantee that you would be paid? Food for thought. Q&A time again. As a buyer, how does this affect me? As a result of the removal of compensation information from the MLS, many, if not all buyer brokers will likely be requiring buyers to sign a written agreement before touring homes. As such, you probably don't want the first time you meet your potential buyer broker to be at your first showing. What if they don't seem as knowledgeable about the purchase process as you would like? What if they feel salesy and pushy and you just don't feel comfortable working with them and now you've already signed an agreement with them? Even if that agreement is only for this one property, what if that property is your dream home and now you're stuck with a broker you don't want to work with for the rest of the transaction? Ideally, this means you should meet with and interview potential buyer brokers ahead of time before starting your search, just like a seller would. Ask them any questions you may have and then choose your broker wisely. Also, try to keep this in mind. If your buyer broker is not comfortable explaining their worth to you and asking to be paid for their work, how well are they going to aid you in negotiations during the purchase process? Okay. I guess I can sign an agreement, but after signing an agreement, am I locked in to work with that buyer broker and for how long? This all depends on the details of the agreement that you sign, so read carefully and ask questions. There are 2 forms that a buyer broker can use when meeting with a new potential buyer. The first one is the brokerage disclosure to buyer. This form discusses possible brokerage relationships and has been updated to add a compensation agreement where you as a buyer agree to pay the broker his or her commission if and when they succeed in helping you close on your desired property. What this form doesn't have is any mention of the fiduciary responsibilities of the broker to you as a buyer, because this form does not allow for an official buyer-broker relationship. The second form is the exclusive right to buy listing form. And I think this is the one that's kind of scary for buyers because it has the word exclusive in it. It also discusses compensation amount, how it is to be paid, and who will be paying it. But more importantly, this is the form that creates the official buyer-broker relationship and outlines all of the responsibilities the buyer-broker has as your fiduciary, as your broker. This is the form that puts the buyer broker 100% in your corner, and it can be used for a single property or for a specified amount of time. For example, 3 months, 6 months, or a year. We prefer to use a time period rather than having to fill out a new form for every single showing. During that period of time, you agree to work with only that broker or team towards finding your home. Hopefully, this shows just how important it is to take your time and choose the right buyer broker before signing any type of agreement. If you're going to be spending 3 to 6 months with this person finding your perfect home, shouldn't you at least spend one interview to make sure they're the right person for the job? What if I don't like the compensation amount on the agreement, or I can't afford to pay it? All compensation has always been negotiable, so you can feel free to negotiate the terms of the exclusive right to buy with your broker. Keep in mind that while you are always free to negotiate, the buyer broker is under no obligation to accept your terms and may decide that their time is not worth the compensation offered. If you feel as though you can't afford to pay a broker's compensation, but you understand the need for representation, talk to them about it. A good buyer broker can think outside the box and help you find a solution through negotiations with the seller to have them cover the buyer broker's compensation in most cases. While these changes are not small, I do believe that the majority of listing brokers will be recommending to their sellers that it is in their best interest to offer compensation to the buyer's broker. Refusing to do so eliminates so many buyers from the buyer pool, and unrepresented buyers are much more likely to miss deadlines or cancel the contract for no good reason, leading to earnest money disputes and possible litigation. Having representation on both sides of the transaction ensures that both sides are well educated, treated fairly, and that neither side tries to exit the contract for a non-legal reason. Simply said, having broker representation for both buyers and sellers eliminates a lot of potential headaches. This has been our discussion on the major changes in the real estate industry that happened on August 17th, 2024 as a result of the NAR settlement. If you have any further questions about these changes or about buying or selling in the Denver Boulder area, please feel free to reach out to Daryl Sobering or myself. I'm Renee Sobering with Team Sobering and Keller Williams Avenues Realty. Like, subscribe, and check out our socials for more information on real estate in the Denver Boulder area. Have a great day.